All right, what is up, everybody? Sorry about the squares there. How are you guys doing today? I'll get that fixed. I apologize. I am here with Mark Birch. How you doing, brother?
Doing awesome.
The energy. Let's have that energy. Let's have that
Let's
energy.
make it happen.
Let's make it happen, brother. Yeah, I don't know what's up with the camera today. It's kind of bugging out, so I'm going to switch over to you. Tell me about it, Taiwan, man. What brought you here? And yeah, out of everywhere in the world,
part of
bro.
it may have been the history of just excellent Mexican food here.
Okay, that's it. Hey, that's us. That's us, right? We're trying. We're trying.
No, it's funny. I never really thought all that much about Taiwan because I came here for a vacation back in 2019 and thought, wow, this is pretty cool. There's these really amazing night markets and everyone seemed really friendly. A lot of culture things as well.
Yep.
And then I left and a pandemic happened. You know, just a mild one.
Just a little one.
And then a few years later, I had moved to a new company. I was working at this small little startup called Amazon. You may have heard of it.
May have heard of it. A little bit.
They sell books, I think. But I was part of the technology arm, Amazon Web Services, in this role of startup advocate. And the team here in Taiwan reached out and said, hey, we're doing this big event. It's called Meet Taipei.
Beautiful.
Which I said, oh, that's pretty cool. A lot of startups there, a lot of tech stuff. And so I thought, all right. I hadn't been to Taiwan in a few years. Things were opening up after COVID. So I said, let's make it happen. So I was invited to speak as one of the keynote speakers at Meet Taipei 2022. The team did an amazing job, though. They set up a whole session at the AWS office in Taipei to bring a whole bunch of founders together. So we had like a fireside chat one evening.
Beautiful.
Then ended up doing a podcast with the guy who I think he has the Asianometry podcast, this guy, John. So fairly well-known podcast here in Taiwan that talks about all things technology. So I did that. Did a few other interviews. So in the course of 3 or 4 days, got all this stuff that the team arranged. And I said, wow, this is pretty cool. And it also gave me an opportunity to see, wow, there's a lot of startup things happening here. So I thought, that's cool. I talked about my experiences. And then the team was so excited about what I did at Meet Taipei, they invited me out to speak at the AWS Summit later that next summer. So 42 Geeks.
I saw that.
You saw 42 Geeks.
We'll talk about
just
that.
for context, 42 Geeks used to be called Geeks on a Plane, something that Dave McClure, who founded 500 Startups, he did essentially just to bring entrepreneurs, investors together to travel to emerging startup ecosystems for cross-collaboration, for investment and startup ideas. So I joined when they had rebranded as 42 Geeks, and they did this tour of Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. I said,
beautiful.
I definitely got to join this. This is going to be awesome. And that's when I learned about this thing called the Taiwan Gold Card, a 4-in-1 visa that allows folks from different industries to come here to work, to live, set up businesses. And I thought that was all interesting.
Beautiful.
But then someone from the Gold Card office actually reached out and said, hey, Mark, would you consider applying? So I applied middle of last year during the summer, received it in 4 weeks. And at that point, I was already thinking about doing a startup again. And so the two kind of came together, and I said, let me give this a go.
That's beautiful, man.
I said, you know what? I'm going to move here to Taiwan and make a go of it.
That's beautiful, man. I think, so for like the average person who doesn't really know, like, how would you define like a startup? Like, is it like a new company or like, for somebody who was asking, like, how could you describe what a startup is? Because it's tough. Because I've heard the term thrown around so much, but I'm just curious if somebody, what is a startup? I'm putting you on the spot. I apologize. I'm just curious.
Because it's funny because
because I've heard so many different things. Yeah.
People talk about how tough it is.
Yeah.
And there's a really famous quote where this very well-known personality says that a startup is like staring into the abyss while chewing glass.
Okay.
So starting anything from the very beginning is hard.
Yes.
What makes a startup more difficult than, say, the typical small business, such as maybe opening up a dry cleaner or opening up maybe an e-commerce shop, is that when you're doing a startup, it's essentially creating a new business model.
Okay.
So a small business has a model. You just have to execute it really, really well.
Okay.
To have some success, and you do the marketing, very typical pathway.
Small business.
For creating a small business. A startup is taking some innovative idea, finding what is going to be a sustainable and scalable business model, and growing from there. So you're starting not just from square one.
Okay.
You're starting from like square minus one. Getting to that point where you can find that repeatable, scalable business model. And then figuring out how to scale from there.
Okay. Wow. And when did you find that this is something you love doing? Like, you're like, this is great. I want to come. I want to support. I want to do my own.
I mean, there's nothing like just waking up in the morning and just chowing down on a big bowl of glass.
Yeah.
So it does seem like a bit of like you're a masochist in a way to do startups, but there's something about wanting to build something from the ground up. And I think any entrepreneur understands what that experience is.
100%.
That even though there's a lot of pain, a lot of difficulties, a lot of face plants, quite frankly. There's an opportunity to build something new, and you're just passionate about it.
Okay.
And you can't get it out of your head. And so many years ago, when I started my first startup from the ground up, it was just an idea I couldn't get out of my head.
Okay. Tell me about that, please. That's great.
So at the time, I was with a very small company that does databases. It's called Oracle. Not a big company.
Okay.
So most of my experience up until that point had been with more established firms. And I didn't really understand all that much about startups.
Okay.
So I was at Oracle, fairly big role, in charge of all of our biggest telecom accounts and managing that team. And every time I would talk to one of these big telco companies around business applications and business challenges, they would oftentimes say the same thing. They were frustrated with their existing software, which at the time, in most cases was PeopleSoft.
Okay.
PeopleSoft, the big HR information system, or HRIS. It was essentially the industry standard back then in the mid-2000s, and Oracle had bought them.
Okay.
So they had brought all these customers on board, but they all were so frustrated with the software because it did everything.
Okay.
But because it did everything, and it was highly customizable, it was incredibly complex, incredibly expensive, and even to get answers for basic things like what are the skills of my organization was really challenging.
Okay.
Like, I just want to know who's good at, a certain type of accounting, or who are my experts in embedded microchips, or all these types of questions are very difficult to answer because you just have this one big empty database.
Okay.
And all these things you have to build to make it work. And from a business point of view, when you have these what you think are very basic business questions, and not able to get answers, it's frustrating.
I can imagine.
Eventually, after talking to all these big customers, I said, there's an opportunity here to reinvent how big companies think about human resources.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
Found a few other folks, got together, co-founded a company, and tried to build from the ground up this software platform that could essentially measure skills across an organization, provide analytics in a way that corporate decision makers could make much more data-driven decisions around the talent in the organization and the best utilize that talent, or to do things that would help to bolster the talent to accomplish corporate goals.
Okay.
So a lot of corporate, like big nerdy business speak, but essentially we just want to know what people can do.
Okay. Yeah.
And what jobs are they most suited for.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Trying to find, a good spot for people, right? Certain people in the right position, right? And yeah, I can understand. We were chatting earlier about, going to like a trade show or something and asking a question and no one can talk or no one has any answers. For me, as like a restaurant guy, like, oh, that for me was always very odd. So I can understand how the businesses are like, how come nobody knows anything? It's such a huge place, it's a huge business. So that makes sense. You're like a bridge to simplification, kind of, right?
Exactly. It's just getting the information that sometimes is already out there.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not, but being able to gather in a place where it's easily accessible. You can just visualize it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, we have a lot of strength in, say, this type of engineering.
Okay.
But as an organization, we're doing this other type of innovation or product work.
Okay.
Is there a way that we can bring this engineering talent that we have to be able to deliver on these big goals around these new products we want to deliver?
Okay.
So that's kind of like an idea or an example.
Okay. Okay. Beautiful. I like that. And you work with a bunch of big companies, quite a few big companies. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, you're talking about Amazon and Oracle and stuff like that. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, what you learned from there and what kind of you brought to your own. I'm sure it's kind of like a buffet where you can see these are some good things and maybe these are not such good things.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the things that people may think is a challenge in big organizations is that they don't innovate, and that's not really the case. They actually do innovate. It's just a very different type of innovation.
Okay.
Because a lot of the things that they do to build products, to serve customers, tend to be more of an iterative nature.
Okay.
So just making incremental, smaller changes to make things better for the customer experience.
Okay.
Which is a little bit different if you're trying to do a startup where you're really building something from the ground up.
Yeah.
To create a stepwise, more than an incremental improvement in helping solve a customer's problems. The other thing that people don't necessarily appreciate, because they'll talk about there's a lot of politics in big companies. There's a lot of interests in a big organization. Sometimes these are competing interests.
Yeah.
Because one group thinks that they want to take their budget and spend it in this way. Another group says, no, maybe this is a better way of doing things. There's some of that internal competition. But the way organizations operate, because they've been doing it for so long, there's certain emotion about it that you start to learn, and you kind of figure out how to navigate. And it's actually a really incredibly valuable skill when you maybe go on the other side and become a startup founder. Okay. Because now you know how big organizations operate. Okay. You understand what these competing interests are. Mm-hmm. And it helps you to understand how to position yourself as some innovative small player to bring value to a large organization, and how to pull those different levers within an organization to help you get situated and hopefully to get a customer. Okay. Okay. Beautiful. And I think you have a book, right? You wrote a book. Yes. About a community. So I did.
How important is community in building a startup?
Now, I wrote a book. That's true.
Yes.
It's called Community in a Box.
Yes.
And just to give a little bit of maybe color to it, it was a book I wrote because I built my own community without really purposefully doing it. Gotcha. Way back in 2014. This was a few years after my startup,
Uh-huh.
and a lot of other founders that I started meeting with around New York City, where I'm from, they knew of me. I had done a lot of writing on my blog called Strong Opinions, and I also would go to lots of events. So I built a pretty strong network.
Okay.
And many of these early stage B2B startup founders would find me
Yeah.
and ask my advice on how to do certain things, particularly when it comes to things like sales,
Okay.
which is the thing that we really excelled at in my startup.
You need to have sales.
But many of the people that I knew in the circle in New York City didn't really have a lot of sales experience. They were more engineering focused or product focused.
Yep. I can relate for sure.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'd be glad to help. And I was in a position to help. But after a while, kind of got a little bit tiring.
Got bored.
Because after
Yeah.
you having the same conversation, right? You're
Sure.
having coffees. And, imagine if you're having, 6 coffee meetings in a day
Okay. Yeah.
and you're just saying the same things over again
Yep.
and you're having 6 coffees.
Yeah.
You might get a few coffee migraine headaches.
Coffee time. Yep.
So, not very healthy. And I figured, you know what, maybe a better way, maybe a more efficient way is bring everyone together to help each other out.
Okay.
So it's not single-threaded. We can all be together in the same room to help each other out.
Okay.
And that was this very first meeting that I hosted in August in a co-working spot that I was working in at the time. And it went really well.
Beautiful.
A lot of people came, a lot more than I expected. And then I
So
figured,
there was a need. You're like, this is
I mean,
necessary.
I definitely felt there was a need. I just didn't know the magnitude of the need.
Okay.
And then the next month, hosted another event, and that was a big deal. A lot of people came, and then over time, so many more people started coming. We would get groups of 200 plus people coming to our monthly events in New York City. And then people in different cities reached out to me and said, hey, can we have this event in Boston? Do you have a chapter in Chicago or San Francisco?
I love it.
So after a while, I started launching these different chapters and finding people on the ground to help out and manage the events on a monthly basis. And then it became a global thing.
Wow.
So we had chapters from Singapore and Sydney all the way to London and everywhere in between, running monthly events all around B2B enterprise sales.
Okay.
And we had some different groups as well, and we do things for just sales managers or sales leaders. Sometimes we do things around customer success. We had another group called the Sales Development Meetup or Forum for people that were just entering into the world of B2B sales, maybe from college or maybe as a career transition. And it created all this enormous value. And so when COVID hit, we stopped meeting in person.
Gotcha.
A lot of people asked me, how do I sustain a community when you're not meeting in person? I said, well,
Zoom, I guess.
you can still do that.
Yeah.
And we are doing that. It's just different. You got to think differently about how events operate
Okay.
and how communities operate when you're all virtual.
Yeah.
And that's when I got the notion of maybe taking this operations guide that I had and turning it into a book.
Gotcha.
And so went through that process. I released it in October 2020. Did fairly well.
Great.
And so the book, get back to your question, is it something that can help startups? I think certain startups, yes.
Okay.
But a startup, as I mentioned before,
Yeah.
it's iterating on a repeatable and scalable business model that can grow. You got to figure out what is that path to finding success, what they call in the industry product market fit,
Okay.
which is when the product you're developing, it's meeting a broadly needed thing out there in the marketplace that's not readily available, or readily available in a way that is accessible to your target market.
Okay.
And a lot of startups fail because they'll never reach product market fit. And then they'll fade away, and the vast majority of startups, that's kind of the end.
It sounds like I've seen a lot sort of come and go, and that's why I'm happy to get you on here because I'm always like, there seems to be a lot of promise, and then things kind of disappear, and it's kind of like that's everywhere, right?
And in some cases, maybe community can be a way of helping you towards product market fit.
Okay.
Maybe not. So it really is a case by case basis.
Okay.
But that's part of the reason why I wrote the book, Community Boxes, so that if I'm a startup founder and I think maybe community could be a thing, to help drive growth, to help drive brand, at least you have some of the tools in a resource that you can look at and maybe evaluate for yourself whether this thing called community makes sense. Now, in some instances, it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
For example, one of the greatest examples of community creating value in this world is the world of open source software.
Sure.
And I don't know how many folks out there are really technical, but you've probably heard of things like Linux software.
Yep.
So companies like Red Hat, which is one of the most famous examples of a very big company that started from open source, where developers around the world.
Maybe people that you can explain what open source software
open source is just, it's a community of people that write software, developers, that collaborate together on writing the source code that becomes a product.
Okay.
And oftentimes these are not products that maybe you and I would use on a regular basis as a consumer.
Yeah.
They're tools that other developers need.
Okay.
So things around maybe managing databases.
Okay.
So a good example is a public company called MongoDB based in New York City.
Okay.
So open source database software. Sometimes it's maybe some aspect of managing your technology infrastructure.
Okay.
So there's companies like HashiCorp, for example. So many examples in this world of software and software engineering where because of open source software that's freely available, anyone can use it, anyone can modify it, that it's now created incredible value in this world so that any developer, no matter what you're building, can build on top of this layer to create applications that we do use every day.
Love it. Okay.
Companies that we know and probably use every day, like Facebook.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
They use a lot of open source software to deliver all the applications that you use.
Okay. Funny thing is, actually, hold on one second. Joe, can you turn off the music in the back? We're going to get copyright strikes. So basically, actually this right now, I'm using a software called OBS, which is an open broadcast software. And when I started to do the podcast, I did all the research, and I'm a restaurant guy. I didn't know anything about this in the beginning. And I'm like, I got to find one that is going to survive and one that's going to work and one that's going to be updated all the time and one that I can just learn once and then, not master this one thing, but I got this one. Like sometimes people, they're like, hey, we use this other software. And I'm like, I have no idea how to use it. I know how to use mine. I know mine. I know my mic and I know my gear. If it goes to something else, it's tough. But I know mine. So again, good example is OBS, open broadcast software. Yeah, that's what I use for live streaming. Yeah, that's awesome, man. Beautiful. So, man, what would be, if I would ask you, the difference between sort of the startup culture in the U.S., which is kind of the original startup culture country, and Taiwan? Of course, it's going to be a huge difference because the U.S. is always on the cutting edge of innovation and stuff like that, right? So it's different vibes, but
obviously difference. You're not going to find what you see in the U.S.
Okay.
Anywhere in the world.
Yep, that makes sense.
And what people don't realize is they think of Silicon Valley as something that started from the 60s.
Okay.
There's a lot of lore and history around companies like Fairchild Semiconductor, and that spawned out a couple entrepreneurs that then launched businesses like Intel, for example.
Nice.
There's companies like HP, and then from that, a new generation formed with folks like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak to form Apple. There's a lot of history there, but it's built on history that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about, which is many of these electronics firms creating components that were precursors to the modern semiconductor.
Okay.
So vacuum tubes and transistors and all the things that we now just don't even think about because it's just a chip
It's just normal,
that we don't see. And
Yeah.
here in Taiwan, we know all about semiconductors.
Sure.
But that history started over 100 years ago
Okay.
with these component providers supplying the military that was based in California, that were all centered around Air Force bases or military facilities. And so that's the real legacy behind Silicon Valley. So it's not something I just started 50 years ago.
Yeah.
It's really more of 100 years
100
ago. And
years.
so a lot of these places around the world are trying to set up startup ecosystems
Sure.
from the ground up. And they're only at the cusp of developing all of the roots that make a startup ecosystem work. So it's about the builders first.
Yep.
First and foremost, you need people that want to build, that have an entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah.
They want to do things for
They
themselves.
see there's an issue that needs to be, there's something that
Right.
needs to be filled, and they're like, we need to make this to fill that hole.
Yeah.
Okay.
You need this class of investors to be able to support that type of innovation.
Okay.
That groundbreaking innovation.
Sure.
And you need support systems that allow entrepreneurs and investors to be successful
Okay.
and to take these nascent companies to global scale. And so sometimes that may be things that the government does to support infrastructure, maybe even grants. You have universities that are providing a funnel for deep research
Yep.
and original research that can drive commercial entities or commercial innovations. And that's all part and parcel of a lot of moving parts that happen
Okay.
in conjunction over time to enable a pool of talent to come through, to provide the environment to take risk, and to provide the capital to make all this happen.
Okay.
Now, where's Taiwan? Still fairly early.
Sure. Okay.
If you look across the ecosystem in Asia, there's other places that have been at this game a little bit longer. China, mainland, for example, Beijing has been a very active startup ecosystem for the past 15 years, particularly a place like Shenzhen, which has been a hotbed for developing a lot of companies.
Yep.
Singapore is another example of
Yeah.
city-state that kind of saw the future and realized as a country that doesn't have many resources, their real strength is going to be in creating IP and intellectual capital and being able to do that in a scalable way. India, which had a long legacy of doing outsourced technology work, particularly in countries like the US.
Sure. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And just having a massive number of engineers that
Yeah.
are going through the various different colleges across
Yeah.
India. So they had like at least a 40-year just head start
Yeah.
in being able
Okay.
to develop a startup ecosystem where then smart, ambitious, young Indian kids decided, you know what, we can build our own companies. We don't have to work at Tata or Wipro or
Gotcha.
any of the big consulting firms. Now, what is great about Taiwan, though, is that there is incredible technology here. There's incredible technology talent.
Yeah.
Something that actually interested me when I thought maybe I can build a startup here in Taiwan is that there's already that core. There's that infrastructure of part of it comes from the hardware and semicon industry and that legacy.
Sure.
But there's also now a growing crop of people that are looking at building software companies here.
Okay.
And so you see a few names like Pic Collage, my
Okay.
friend John Fan, who's been doing a great thing, building a really great creative and innovative culture in the company. There's companies like Appier, which are fairly sizable now,
Okay.
doing some really great innovation around AI and marketing. There's companies that a lot of people don't even know are actually Taiwanese born and bred, like Perfect, which is driving the brand experiences, the visual brand experiences for some of the leading cosmetic brands in the world. It just happens that they're officially based in San Francisco,
Okay.
but their core is being a spinoff of Cyberlink, which is a Taiwanese company.
Okay, that's beautiful. I didn't know a lot of these companies were Taiwanese, man. Okay, but you know what? We've got a couple of questions here, so let me just get to those.
Yeah, sure.
Do you think it's realistic that Taiwan, something software industry? Let's see. Give me a sec. Realistic that Taiwan develops a software industry. Sorry about that late. Yeah.
I don't know the future.
Yeah.
I think it's possible.
Okay.
I'm here to try and be a part of that.
Yeah.
There are some organizations like 886 Studios that are doing some great work to help to create an accelerator program. They had their first run, I think, several months back. They're doing their second batch this coming summer. So that's an organization that launched by, again, because of the Gold Card program. They brought
we'll talk about that in a second.
very successful Taiwanese American entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley to here to build new stuff. But you also have a history of companies like AppWorks that's been here for the longest time. I think they've
got something big coming up, right? Like the yearly thing this month or next month or something.
And they have their accelerator programs, which they run continuously. And so they've been incredibly active in Taiwan from really early stages.
Okay.
And so there's all these initiatives that have been going on. They haven't gotten a lot of publicity.
Okay.
So I think part of the answer to the question is that there really is a software industry here.
Okay.
It's just not advertised as much because what's the big industry here? Let's face it.
Yeah, I know for sure.
It's doing hardware and it's doing semiconductor.
Of course, the semiconductor. Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go, right? I heard next week, oh, Jesus, Francis is my buddy here. He's on this. No, yeah.
Hey,
so what's up, guys? Appreciate it. Don't forget to sub to the channel, man. Yeah. Next week I have a guy who's there's a pyramid in Taiwan that he found, and he's going to take me on this tour, this virtual tour of it. So he's just talking about that. My guy there. Brother, so how do you balance like the technical side and like the business side, and all the things that you have to do, right? Like, so before we do that, what's like a typical day for you, like a guy like you, like a startup guy like you
in
Taiwan?
A typical day may be a bit different right now than it may be a month from now.
Okay.
Because my extreme focus has been doing a second edition of Community in a Box, because there's a lot more content around the business of communities, around adding stuff around monetization, around connecting community activity to business impact and value.
Okay.
So a lot more content that I'm very proud of. It just took a long time to actually put a lot of that together.
Okay.
So that's been a lot of my focus. So it's been a lot of writing, a lot of preparing the marketing for that.
Yeah.
Choosing book covers. So that's been my all-consuming effort. But
so step one, you want to finish that.
Because that's going to lead into the startup, which is all about helping companies to quantitatively measure the impact of community activity to business results, to business goals, and so on.
Okay.
So when I go into building mode for the startup, it's going to be a balance of a lot of things. There's obviously building the MVP or minimal viable product, just the thing that you can use to go out to customers with, or you can use to recruit as well, to show, hey, this is the idea, what are your thoughts, and start to build a relationship where you can start iterate with some of these early potential customers to get to a product that you can then go ahead and launch and start to move forward towards product market fit. As I mentioned before. And that's really the litmus test of a startup, whether it succeeds or dies. If you don't get the product market fit, you don't have a startup, you have a really interesting hobby, but not enough customers that are willing to pay. So you really want to be able to get that validation in the market really early on with customers that are willing to pay. So it's going to be part of building some things, going out and doing some of that early customer development work. And those are really the only two modalities in an early startup. Now, there's third part, which is the operations side, where
Yeah.
there are some setup things here in Taiwan
Okay.
that just need to happen. And
Yeah.
as an immigrant entrepreneur, I'll be very frank, there's some things that we have to go through
Yeah.
that wouldn't necessarily be the case or necessarily as big of a roadblock if you were a Taiwanese starting a company.
Sure, sure. I agree 100%. Yeah, I've been here for a long time. We got another question here. Hold on. I write open source software, but I never spend much time networking here locally. Which events, cities do you recommend?
Well, actually, I just heard of I don't know where the person asking the question is from, but the Taiwan or International Taiwan Tech Office is doing a happy hour in Kaohsiung.
Oh, really?
That's, I think, coming up in a week or so.
There you go.
Yeah, next week. So there are these events. I would say follow that's one organization because they're trying to be that bridge between bringing in talent outside Taiwan
Okay.
to people that are in Taiwan that may want to work with foreign entrepreneurs
Okay.
or look for opportunities. There are various different meetups. A lot of stuff is on actually Facebook, so I'm still discovering where some of these activities are.
Yeah.
But there are different things. I would say look out for them. Start to follow people on places like LinkedIn, for example.
Well, I've got in the description below. I've got your LinkedIn, so people want to follow you. Go check the LinkedIn below.
I tend to
Send
do
this guy a message.
an okay job trying to track the events that I'm attending, and just provide a little bit of my experiences around the different communities and events that are happening here. But if you start following some of those folks that are already doing startup stuff here, or doing software development here in Taiwan, invariably you'll find things. So I would say just search for Taiwan open source or software developer communities, and you'll find a few things that are happening in different cities across Taiwan.
Okay, beautiful. So you touched a little bit on Gold Card, right?
Yes.
So a lot of people probably have heard of the Gold Card. I've been doing the entrepreneur thing in Taiwan for like 16 or 17 years. So this way before Gold Card, right? But because I'm married, I wasn't able to do anything on my own, but through marriage, it was okay. But now there's the Gold Card and there's like entrepreneur visa and stuff like that. I don't know how much info you have on that. I know you have a Gold Card. So maybe you can touch a little bit on that. I know in some countries they'll have like digital nomad visas and stuff like that. So maybe you can kind of touch a little bit on that. If you don't mind. Yeah.
As I said, I learned about the Gold Card when I went on that 42 Geeks tour, and it just so happened at the very first meeting that we had on that tour was at this co-working facility called Future Ward in Songshan.
Oh, I know it. Future Ward. Yeah.
That's also back to the previous question. Look at co-working spaces. If you want to look for really interesting events where you can meet other people that do the things that you're doing or interested in. So it just happened at our very first meeting or meetings of the day. We're at Future Ward, and we had a few presentations by some folks that I'm now good friends with, like Bruce Bateman, if you're out there listening.
Oh, I know Bruce. His son teaches my daughter jiu-jitsu.
There you go.
There you go.
See, like
there you
small
go.
world connections here.
Small world, yeah.
Alyssa Chio, who runs, I think, Bike Ventures.
Okay.
So there's like a few folks. And then Jonathan Liao, who runs Future Ward.
Okay.
So he's the owner of it. And he also is the managing director for the Gold Card office.
Okay.
So he gave a talk about what the Gold Card is. I said, wow, it's pretty fascinating. So what makes it, I think, uniquely different than a lot of these digital nomad visas is that digital nomad visas, they want to bring people into their country, but it's very temporary. There's not really a pathway to residency or even citizenship. And it does feel very temporary.
Okay.
You go to these countries.
It's like a backpacker
you
guy
kind of
can
have
kind of hang out.
a little bit of status.
Okay.
But it doesn't feel like status for long term.
Okay.
Whereas with the Gold Card, it operates in a very different way. So it gives you opportunity, enough time to explore what those opportunities might be here in Taiwan.
Okay.
To work here, to live here, to be able to go in and out of the country very quickly, to be able to tap into some of the advantages or benefits, whether it be taxes, whether it be healthcare, education. So it just moves a pathway for folks that may be thinking about doing something here in Taiwan, whether it may be for research, maybe for school, maybe employment, maybe to launch your own business.
Okay.
To give yourself enough time to explore some of those opportunities and build something. So it's 3 years. You can extend it. You can switch over to an ARC or alien resident card or certificate.
Yeah.
And so there's a very clear pathway.
Okay.
If you do decide to stay, to be here long term.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, maybe I can. I'd actually like to meet. I've seen Jonathan Leon. I think he posted it on LinkedIn and you shared it. So I followed him because of your stuff. So actually, I would love to check him out and because I meet a lot of different entrepreneurs and there's so many. Like, there's new things like the gold card and stuff like that. And yeah, that'd be good. It'd be good to know more about that because there's always the questions about it and because I have the business for so long, I have no idea. Like people will say, "Oh, what's your recommendation with the gold card?" I'm interested in it because it's good info to know and to share.
Yeah, right.
But personally, I have no idea, right? Because I did my business like 16 years already. So
yeah, I mean,
cool.
you are here. Like the environment.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of folks that maybe from the U.S. or Europe or anywhere in Southeast Asia, for example, or even like Japan, because there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are in Japan that are now potentially looking at Taiwan, and which is interesting because one of the organizations I've kind of been helping out is Startup Island Taiwan.
Okay. Yeah.
And they've been putting up these kind of branch offices or hubs in different places. So they started in Japan, and then they opened up one in Silicon Valley.
Okay.
Back in January this year that I attended. So I was part of the opening ceremony.
Nice.
They did like a whole ceremonial thing. So the minister of the National Development Council came out.
Big time.
They had a bunch of Taiwanese startups as well that went to CES in the U.S. in Las Vegas to be part of a booth set up. And then to go through Silicon Valley to do kind of like an entrepreneur tour.
Okay.
Meet up with investors. So I was there for the opening ceremony. And with the reality is, not a lot of people do know about Taiwan and the opportunities here. And so it's really encouraging to see that there's this investment that's being made and going to the U.S., going to Japan, and maybe opening up some of those channels for entrepreneurs or investors to look at Taiwan and maybe see what some of those opportunities might be.
I love that, man. And I got one more question for you. Sort of in the last year or so, the rise of like AI. Right? How do you think that kind of will affect sort of the startup, industry? Does it have to have some kind of AI built in, or how do you think it'll kind of affect, industries that you're involved in or that you know?
So,
or will it? Yeah.
AI will be everywhere.
Okay.
I don't think you
can't avoid it.
There's a lot of people that, out there. You'll hear some of the chatter and some social media.
Yeah.
There's people that are very, I wouldn't say that they're anti-AI.
There's a lot of doom and gloom out there for sure. Terminator
there's a lot of scare tactics. A lot of people that are very negative about the consequences of AI and want to control it, and they want to limit some of the research. And I think it's completely counterproductive. I think AI is just, again, another one of these tools that is going to unleash enormous amounts of human productivity.
Okay.
And quite frankly, innovation that we have never experienced before. And all these happen in stepwise manner. If we just look at technology, like modern day technology, every 20 years or so, we've seen this huge stepwise increase in capability and productivity because of some innovation that's come along. So way back in the day, we had these things called mainframes, which a lot of folks that are younger listening may have no idea what a mainframe is. Just think about a computer that's probably the size of this restaurant.
Yes, yes.
But nowhere near as efficient as, say, the power on your cell phone.
On your cell phone, yeah, your iPhone.
But mainframes were a huge step change from doing things pen and paper. And so now you had all this information that was now digitized, much more easily accessible. And then 2 decades later, those big, massive, huge computers that were millions of dollars to maintain and to buy then got condensed into something you can have on a table that you can use yourself.
Personal computer
The
at
personal
home,
computer.
PC.
Or the Macintosh. And that was another huge step function in productivity.
The Pentium 100.
Anyone
I remember those days.
At
the Pentium
home
100.
Or at work, you can do computer things
Yeah.
that you can never even imagine you'd be able to do.
Monochrome monitors, right? Yeah.
Think about the rise of things like a spreadsheet. Now spreadsheets, no one thinks about it.
Yeah, it's normal.
But back then, it completely revolutionized the accounting industry because they were doing things on pen and paper because they couldn't afford a mainframe. And now a PC with something like Lotus 123, which I'm sure maybe 2 or 3 people listening have any idea what that is.
Okay.
That's really the precursor to Microsoft Excel.
Okay.
That was a stepwise function. And then the cloud happened.
Yeah.
So we think about the internet as a big thing, but really the big innovation was that there's this computer that's not on your desk, but now it's somewhere in this thing that we call cloud, a server that we access through the internet. And it provides enormous potential that we now use or access via apps, whether it's maybe Salesforce if you're a salesperson, or HubSpot. Maybe it's some sort of accounting software like a Xero. Like all these technologies and anything that's on your mobile phone, all these apps, they're all running essentially on the cloud, accessing information, doing searches. So that was the next innovation. Then AI. That is the now current innovation, and it's still very early days. Everyone talks about generative AI and chatbots, and now even in this evolution, early days, we're already seeing changes in that.
Yes.
Because there's new approaches to large language models, as we've seen with things like DeepSeek.
DeepSeek, shaking up the world, right?
Completely shook up the world of large language models because they did everything at a fraction of the cost.
Yeah.
And then you also have this concept called agentic AI, which allows you to build workflows that don't even require human input. It's essentially leveraging reasoning through stepwise manner to almost think like humans. Now, not quite there yet. It's still, again, early days for all of this, but it's changing the way that we think about and architect software.
Okay.
So it'll be pervasive everywhere. And in fact, I even wrote in a recent post in my newsletter called Founders in the Cloud, I wrote about this concept of community AI, which AI is going to be pervasive in everything we do, but particularly from a community perspective. There's going to be a lot of AI which can be applied to measuring effectiveness, to improving the effectiveness of your communities, and taking a lot of the drudgery of doing a lot of like the hands-on work off the hands of people that are managing or building communities.
Yes. I think that's beautiful, man. Yeah, I always, see the doom and gloom, the Terminators are coming posts, and you're like, come on, man, it's kind of crazy. But brother, I think we've covered quite a bit. I want to ask you if there's anything that we didn't hit that you wanted to talk about.
One, I do got to reiterate, I think Taiwan is a great place for building great software. I really do believe in the next 10 years we're going to see an evolution, just like we saw 30 years ago with semiconductors here in Taiwan. We're going to see a software revolution.
Okay.
And it's going to be based here, that leverages a lot of the talent and expertise that was built over many decades. And I think software is really the future for Taiwan. And I'm here to help build that. If anyone else is interested in building really awesome software, I'd love to meet. I'm here in Taipei and looking forward to meeting a lot of folks that are listening here. And let's find some time to chat.
Beautiful, man. And if you want to meet up with Mark, in the description below, we've got your LinkedIn there. Just add him on LinkedIn, send him a message, and you guys will hook up. Appreciate it, man. Thank you, guys.
Awesome, Eddie.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for checking us out. Don't forget to go check out LinkedIn, find Mark, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.
Thank you everybody for watching Eddie's show. We feel only happiness, don't feel any sorrow. Welcome everybody to watch more on his contact, Eddie Live Podcast.
No? Yeah, see, look at that. I don't know why the boxes are there. It's weird, right? I'm going to have to...
And so does it show up in the YouTube?
It probably does. Yeah, that's why I didn't use that camera. Yeah, we were using this one mostly. These other ones, yeah, because I don't like the boxes. Yeah. How you doing, man? You good?
Good. You guys still on the air?
No, we're done. We're done now. Yeah, yeah. How you been? All right?
I'm really good.
I haven't seen you in a while. What you been up to?
Well, I've been here a couple times when you weren't.
Okay. Well, apologies for that.
But no, I'm good.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
out walking, and I decided I was going to get something to dinner to take home. So I said,
Hey,
well,
we appreciate
this is
it.
the place
Man.
to come. So,
We appreciate it, especially on these rainy days, man, where it's like, well, where is everybody?
Mark.
Yeah.
Pleasure, Larry. Good to meet you.
Thanks for coming, man. I appreciate it.
I'll
yeah?
be back in about
Okay.
15 minutes.
Sounds good. Sounds good. We'll be ready for
I'm
you.
doing my steps.
All right, do your thing, man. Take care.
Put the music on.
Yeah, his food can come up now. Yeah, didn't he order or not? Did he order or not yet?
I did. I got some
So his
tacos.
food can come
Make
up.
the
Yeah.
free tacos.
Yeah, his food can come up. Yeah, that's fine. I'm gonna have to take this thing home and YouTube all the.
Yeah, I was searching quickly
Yeah.
before we got on.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't get any like really useful answers.
Yeah, yeah.
But people did mention it that wasn't a